Hello, I'm Quentin, and I'd like to show you how you can control your CODA digital signage system using the API, the Application Programming Interface. We're very proud of our web-based drag-and-drop user interface for CODA. It's almost ridiculously easy to use, and it's one of the things that makes CODA stand out from the crowd. But we realize that not everybody wants to control their digital signage system this way. So from very early on, we made available a web-based API, which you can use from your own code in whatever programming language you prefer to do almost everything that you can do with the drag-and-drop browser interface. This lets you drive your CODA system from your own desktop or mobile applications, from your own website, or perhaps to integrate it with existing systems. One of our partners, for example, has an online digital content store. And when you purchase a set of content from them, you can click a button on their site and the content appears as a playlist directly in your CODA account, ready to drag and drop immediately onto your screen. Other example applications change the content that's being displayed on your screens in response to an employee swiping an RFID tag, or scanning a barcode, or sending a text message or tweet. The API, like the rest of CODA, uses modern, standard, web-based technologies, so it should be a familiar world to anybody who's used to developing in this area. And even if you aren't, I hope to demonstrate to you in just a few minutes that it's really not very hard. So let's get started. The first thing that you need to know is that the API is fully documented on the Camvine support website. And unlike some other platforms, it's freely available to anybody with a CODA system. If you go to support.camvine.com, click on the knowledge base link, you'll see an API section down here, which will tell you everything you need to know about using the web-based API. Now, I'm going to be using Python for this demonstration, so I'll assume you're at least basically familiar with that and with the operation of a CODA system. Python has the other advantage that we've written a very small wrapper library called PyCoda, which makes things even easier. You can get PyCoda by going to the project's page on GitHub. That's github.com/camvine/PyCoda. And you can pull a copy directly using Git, if you're familiar with that, or you can go to this downloads link and download a copy of the directory as a zip or tar file. Now, I've created a CODA directory on my hard disk in which we're going to do these experiments. And I'm going to drag into there the directory we just downloaded. You'll see this is called Camvine PyCoda and some numbers which represent the particular release, but to keep everything simple, I'm just going to rename it to be PyCoda. And you'll see that in this directory there are just a few files, and the two key ones here are api.py, which is really very small. Let me put it in my favorite editor here. And you can see that there's really not very much to it. It really is a very thin wrapper around the web server API. The other file is this readme.txt here, which is, I hope, a nice, simple, readable tutorial which tells you essentially everything I'm going to tell you here. So you can sit back and relax, you don't need to take notes, and you can refer back to this README if you don't catch any of the details that I'm going to tell you now. Right. I will be copying and pasting bits in from that README from time to time, so you don't have to sit through me typing very slowly. Okay, let's start at the command line here. And I'm going to run Python from the command line. Now the first thing I need to do is one line to import a CODA server definition from that PyCoda API file we looked at earlier. And then I need to create a CODA server object using a line like this. Create a CODA server, giving it two things, a consumer key and a consumer secret. So, what are those? We don't know those yet, so we need to go and get them. These are things that basically identify your particular application to CODA. so that it knows what the request is coming from, but it also means that if in future you ever want to disable users of a particular application that you've created, you can simply do that on the website, and anything using this consumer key and consumer secret would then be disabled. So it's important to create a new one of these for each new application that you distribute. And you do that by going to another useful site on the Camvine website. I'll show you how to get there. It's also in the README file. If you're looking at the API page on the knowledge base here, go to the authentication bit and visit CODA Dev Central here. You need the consumer key and secret pair, which you can get here. I should apologize, by the way, that the OAuth based authentication system that PyCoda uses, that the CODA interface uses, is perhaps the most complicated bit of the whole system, and so you're seeing the most difficult stuff up front. Once we get through this, it really becomes very easy. So I'm going to add a new application here so that CODA knows about it, and I'm going to give it a test app, imaginatively named, for the Screencast. And I would give here the URL where you could find out more about your application. Normally I'm just going to put camvine.com. I click submit, and you'll see that it's now listed as one of my applications. And over here are the OAuth key and the OAuth secret that's what you need to put in as the consumer key and the consumer secret in the API. So I'm going to just copy that, go here and put that in, that's the key, and copy that, and put that in, and that's the secret. So now I have this object which I've called S, which represents a connection to the CODA server as this application. Okay. The next thing I have to do is, when a particular user is running this application, in this case just me at the command line, the application needs to connect to CODA and say, I want to do certain things, and it has to be authorized to do that. What permissions is it going to have? Well, the way OAuth works, and you may have seen something very similar on systems like Twitter and Flickr, is that you connect as if you were a particular user. So what you need to get at this point is an authorization, an access token that says this application is allowed to connect and have essentially the permissions of this user. So how do we create one of those? Well, if you haven't got one for the user who's currently running your application, you need to get one. And the way you do that is to use the getAuth method on this server object that you've got. This says, give me an authentication request token and URL. Let's get that. And if you look at our doc, you'll see it looks like that. And if you look at URL, you'll see it looks like that. Right. Now what you have to do is get your user to go to this URL where they'll be asked whether they want to allow this app to operate as them. So I'm just going to paste it in here for now, but often it would be your desktop app, your web app, or whatever would redirect the user to this point and say, which says the application a test app, that's what we wanted to call it, wants access to your resources, and is that okay? And I'm going to say yes, and pick the organization if I'm in more than one, to which I'm giving it access. Okay, submit. CODA now knows that essentially our token is approved, and we can now move on to the next stage. So the next stage is to say, okay, from that R token, which represents this particular request on behalf of the user, get an access token. And this is the important thing, right? That's an access token. And if you have that access token, you are able to do things on behalf of that user. So it's something you want to store so that your application doesn't need to ask the user to go to the website every time, but it's also something that you want to keep reasonably confidential. You probably want to store it in the file system or in a database or somewhere to which only that user or applications running on their behalf would have access. Just as a quick diversion, by the way, if you're logged into CODA, you can go to the settings area here, and you'll see under the services section all of the apps that have been authenticated as you. So the access token relates to a particular application. So we can see here this was a test app. You can find out more about it. You added it on the 18th of June, and that token that was generated has permission to operate as you within the CODA environment. And if you ever want to get rid of that, you just click the revoke button. Okay, let's get rid of this. Okay. From this point onwards, it becomes much easier. I'm going to ask the CODA server object that we had earlier to give me an instance of a CODA object using that access token. And I'm going to call it C. And then we can essentially use this C object to start making calls on the standard CODA API. So I can say, for example, get displays, and that gives me a list of the displays that are in this organization. Now, most things are returned as using standard JSON format here, so this may look familiar to you. It's fairly easy to decode in most languages if you don't know it. Actually, this is already a Python encoding of the JSON that's returned. So what we've actually got here is one display that's in my system. I've only got one in this organization. It has a name of Quentin's display. It has various parameters like a unique identifier here, which represents this display in CODA. You can see a few things like various IP addresses, you can see which resolution it's running in, and so forth. What resolutions this screen supports, and a whole variety of other useful information. We can similarly say, I want to get all the sources in my organization. That's the content sources. The content sources that can be assigned to a screen. Let's put them in a variable called sources. And actually, I'm going to restrict it here because you may have a very large number of these in your organization. So I'm going to restrict this to ones that have the phrase NASA in their name. There you go. Now, you can see that that can be done. If we go back again to the description of the API, and if I look at get sources here, you can see the various optional parameters that you can give to the get sources command, and it'll tell you what you'll get back in return. So refer to these pages in the knowledge base if you want to find out more about what you can do with each call. So what we get back from sources is a list. Until it's a list because it's got brackets around it, of all the sources that have NASA in the name, and you'll see that this is a video that's been uploaded, and it's called nasa420.mov. And so that again allows you to search for the various different sources in various different ways. I can, for example, extract this UUID. This is a unique identifier, and almost every object in CODA has one of these. And they look something like this, and you'll see that the display has, the display has one here, a display UUID, which is that, and the source has one, which is the source UUID. You can also see, incidentally, on the display that a source UUID is also included here. That is the source that is currently on that display.